I think what I better do is just talk. You keep talking, we'll all get on fine. I welcome you here. It's a lovely group. And only this group would have a rickety old ute, a sports car, a totally restored ancient Holden, and that's that kind of group. And it's put together for the reason that you are gentle with each other. And as I'm aging a bit, I've thought I better have some notes. So what I've got here is, in my view, this is a classic Australian party. Yeah, it's been contributed by everyone who's here, so it's a team.
Beneath our radiant Southern Cross, we'll toil with hearts and hands to make this commonwealth of us renowned of all the lands. For those who come across the sea, with boundless place to share, with courage let us all combine to advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair. Click, 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 tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and it could be your fate.
Well, it will get better, I hope. The champagne clearly hasn't kicked in. Now, I'm going to sing 2 verses and then we'll sing the chorus, otherwise we won't get out of here by dark. Just be ready for your turn. When swimming in Australia and when surfing too, there are creatures in the sea that would like a bite of you. So that thing wrapped around your leg might not be seaweed. It's possibly a great white shark looking for a feed. Touring through the north, you'll meet saltwater crocodiles. They'll grab you and take you on for an underwater ride. When someone asks, where is he gone? It's not just a riddle. Crocs know you're soft on the outside, but crunchy in the middle. There's your hands. Click, go the cameras, click, click, click. Tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now, before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and it could be your fate. More from marine life now. The box jellyfish is the deadliest in the land. It has 60 tentacles with death on every strand. Once you've been stung, there isn't much to do. Just lie and scream in pain until the angels come for you. In Australia it's not as common to be run over by a bus as to be bitten on the big toe by a blue-ringed octopus. Minutes is all you've got to make your peace with God. Before the darkness closes in and they put you beneath the sod. Click, click, the cameras, click, click, click. Tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now, before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and that could be your fate. Now we move on to snakes. The tiger snakes and dew guides, wilders and death adders. The eastern brown snake bite will surely loosen up your bladder. If any of these bite you, there is no time to spare. Get to a hospital, there might be anti-venom now. Inland taipan's venom would kill 100 human beings. So if you tangle with one, avoid being bitten by all means. There is an antidote, but it lies in Brisbane town, several hundred miles away if transport can be found. Click, click, click. Tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now, before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and death could be your fate. Spiders. The funnel-loop spider is another one to fear. They say it's just in Sydney, but they also could be here. When you put your socks on and a pain shoots up your calf, segmentical attention here, they write your epitaph. The little red-backed spider is really very small, so insignificant you won't notice it at all. She lurks beneath the seats of toilets in Australia, and when you least expect it bites you on your genitalia. Click, click, click.
Tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now, before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and death could be your fate.
While we're on about all the dangers to be found, touring in Australia and driving all around, here's some great advice that I have to unload. When driving in Australia, drive on the left side of the road. Tourists are departing, they've all had their wish. Swimming up in Queensland with Irukandji jellyfish. We wish them all the best and hope they're back again next year. Just remember, deadly fauna will be waiting for you here. Click,
Cameras, click, click, click. Tourists taking pictures with a selfie stick. Better tell them now, before it is too late. Mess with Aussie animals and death could be your fate.
I'd like to talk about an author, Pat Lowe, and an artist illustrator, Jimmy Pike. Now, you've probably heard of Jimmy Pike, who became famous, known nationally and internationally as a wonderful artist, and has had exhibitions around the world. But his story, I don't want to focus on that side of the story. I'd like to focus on his relationship with Pat Lowe, who was the author. Now, Jimmy was born in the Great Sandy Desert, east of Japinka waterhole, which was the most used waterhole in the desert, was used for ceremony and cultural activities. Now, Jimmy grew up, he was born circa 1940, so obviously there are no details of exact birth. But he grew up in the desert with his family, traditional family. They were hunters and gatherers. They moved from waterhole to waterhole, and in his childhood, Jimmy learned the culture of his people. He learned the animals, the flowers, the stories, the ceremonies, and he carried that with him through his life, obviously. Now, with the arrival of the European settlers in the Kimberley, the desert life was gradually lost because he and his people moved north to the rivers and the valleys and the stations that were established in the Kimberley. And Jimmy worked on a number of cattle stations. For a while he was a fringe dweller at Cherubin Station. You've probably heard of Cherubin because it was a well-known station in the Kimberley then. He eventually actually moved onto the station where some of his family were working, and he was actually named Jimmy Pike. I don't know what his traditional name was. He was given the name Jimmy Pike by a station manager who named him after Farlap's jockey Jimmy Pike, which I didn't know either. So obviously he was a very skilled horse person. When Jimmy moved among this mixture of cultures, he was caught up in some of the worst sides, and he was actually convicted of a serious crime as a result of him being involved in alcohol. And he was imprisoned in Fremantle jail and then moved to Broome. Now, while he was in Fremantle prison, one of the local artists, Kevin Roth, became involved. He was working with them and gave him the opportunity to become involved in his different art skills. And he immediately his talent just shone through. So that was developed there, and he did have exhibitions. When he was released from Fremantle, he was returned to Broome, and he was in prison for a little while there. Now, so paralleling that, Pat Lowe was born in England, and she apparently as a child always dreamt of migrating to Australia. That's where she wanted to be. She went to East Africa, worked there as a postman, and 3 years as a secondary school teacher. Then she became a psychologist.
As I was listening to Rutter's rendition of To the Beauty of the Earth, I don't know whether you are aware of it, I'm sure David will be. Those who are of school, the old you would know that choirs sing it. And I thought, well, I'll share a little bit of the beauty of the earth with you this morning, and I'm not going to be long-winded. The part of the earth that I'm going to share with you is where I've just come back from. It's not like these good people who have just come back from overseas. It took me 3.5 hours to get back. And while I was down there, I had the great pleasure of meeting with David and Marilyn and of course John and Monica. And I talked of Augusta, the particular part of Augusta. And there's a lot of people down in Augusta that think the beauty of the earth is reflected in Augusta, and particularly to a little place called Flat Rock. And they call it Augusta's King's Park. And this is a volume that was prepared by some local people doing lots of research. And they researched into the environments of this rock and this outcrop and all the plants around it. And I thought I'd just share a couple of things like that with you. It's only a site of about 80 hectares, and it actually boasts something like about 265 different species of flowering wildflowers. It boasts at least 65 different orchids. It boasts 165 different sorts of fungi. And you can sort of see how precious this part is. I thought I'd talk to you a little bit, very, very quickly about perhaps one of the plants there. It's called a petticoat flower. It's actually a carnivorous flower, and it just has this one flower up with a pink flower on the top and a lot of roots on the bottom. And it lives in where it's wet, where the water runs off the rock. And its roots, it's got a lot of roots, and on its roots it's got a lot of globules. And these globules, in actual fact, are where it feeds. So what it does, it exudes by squeezing itself, this globule. So all the water is pushed out, which obviously is sort of sprung there. And it stays like this until a little worm or whatever might go passes by, and within a millisecond it will spring open, and the vacuum draws that animal into its things and it closes up again and consumes it. So
get back on and then you swing your man. Join up hands, you circle to the left. Alaman left your corner with the ring. I'll give you a daisy, dear. Swing that girl and then you promenade. I'll love you until the ribbons run still and the four winds we know blow away. As you promenade, go halfway down the middle, past the ocean and extend. Swing through. The boys go run right, bend the line, go right and left through, past the ocean and recycle. Swing your girl and promenade. Let's promenade, go halfway.
So we thought we'd better become Australian citizens. So we filled in the forms, and we answered all the questions,
Yes.
and we had to swear allegiance to the...
Hang on, we have to go to the ceremony.
Oh, we had to swear allegiance to the Queen.
All right, then do it your way.
Oh, okay. Do we have to do that at the ceremony?
Shall I go and sit down?
Yeah, no. So we filled in the form, didn't we? And
Yes,
we
yes.
passed the test. And then they said you must come to... Where do we have to go?
The leisure centre.
To the leisure centre
Really fair.
at Beatty Park. And it was a very nice place to be. And we had to, we went with a few other people. And then there was people on the stage, important people. And one of the persons had a
medal.
Medal. I was very impressed.
Might have been a Romeo, I don't know.
I don't know, but it was the medal. And we all just did as we were told.
And we had to say the various things, and had to swear allegiance to the Queen. So you must imagine then, we got all these very important people on the stage, and about 30 or 40 would-be Australians, dressed in their best clothes, very nervous about becoming Australian, so it was a very tense affair. And then this Australian got up with the guitar, and we thought, well, this is pretty serious. So he said, everybody stand, so we all had to stand.
So we'd like you to stand as well, because that's what we have to do.
So just imagine yourself, you've been on Australia 2 years, you want to join this wonderful country, and they're going to sing you the Australian song to make you part of it. And you're very nervous, everything's very rich, everything's... And then he started.
Ready? Give me a
home among the gum trees, lots of plum trees, a sheep or two, a kangaroo, a clothesline at the back, a veranda at the front, and an old rocking chair. Again?
Have you got it?
Give me a home among the gum trees, lots of plum trees, a sheep or two and a kangaroo, a clothesline at the back, veranda at the front, and an old rocking chair.
And then we said, thank you very much, now we're Australian. And now we will go, and as we went out, they gave us a little grevillea plant, and it died within 6 weeks.
More importantly, nonetheless, January 26th is our National Day. Some call it Australia Day. Others call it Invasion Day. Some might even call it Multicultural Day, whilst others could even call it Prime Ministerial Rotation Day. Now, before I stop rambling, remember that this is not only a day of celebration, it's also a day of rewards. Rewards for the contributions made to the great province and nation of ours, Rossmania, Australia. It's now, I don't know if you're aware, but we have in our midst today a very important personage by the way of the Governor-General, Mr. Billy Billington, OBE. Would you please come forward? My pleasure.
As Governor General of this great nation, I have the power to award our most outstanding citizens with titles in recognition of their great service to the nation. I hereby call upon John and Monica Reid to step forward and receive their awards. So if we can have them come up.
Don't worry, it doesn't look sharp, mate.
We'll wait until you get a try of this. Now, could you come up here, please? John, who is from the ancient province of Rossmania here, has achieved the impossible by being an architect, an engineer, a plumber, a masonry worker, a welder, a staircase fabricator, an electrician, a carpenter, a draftsman and a mechanic, all combined as in evidence at this Reddington Manor here. You can see it all, which has been a labour of love for this talented citizen. But he was ably assisted by his forbearing, industrious, stalwart wife Monica, who showed great fortitude and patience in being able to cope with her ever-changing residence here at Reddington Mansion. Now it gives me great pleasure in awarding John Reid, that's actually Scottish Redbeard actually, Reid is a Redbeard, a knighthood of the Australian...
Do I go down?
Yes, you go down. Get up again. I anoint you a Knight Sir John of the Australian Spotted Drongo, a rare award that only a few Australians ever receive, and his good wife Monica is to be a Dame of the Spangled Parliament. You go down. A rare award, as few women have shown the enormous fortitude and enduring capacity to live with such a genius as John. I hereby appoint them as Sir John Reid and Dame Monica Reid in recognition of their valuable service to making Rossmania a residential area of outstanding architectural gems of individual genius. Rise, rise. Rise, sir. Well done.
We are one. We are the people of a free nation of blokes, shields and the occasional wanker. We come from many lands, although a few too many of us come from New Zealand. And although we live in the best country in the world, we reserve the right to bitch and moan about it whenever we bloody well like. We are one nation, but divided into states.
First was Victoria, named after a queen who didn't believe in lesbians. Victoria is the realm of cafe latte, grand final day, big horse races. Its capital is Melbourne, whose chief marketing pitch is that of it's livable. At least that's what they think. The rest of us think it's too bloody cold and wet.
South Wales, the realm of pastel shorts, macchiatos, sugar, thin books read quickly, and millions of dancing queens. Its capital, Sydney, has more queens than any other city in the world and is proud of it. Its mascots are Bondi lifesavers that pull their speedos up their cracks to keep their left and right sides of their brains separate.
Down south we have Tasmania, a state based on the notion that a family that bonks together stays together. Tassie, everyone gets an extra chromosome at conception. Maps of the state bring smiles to the sternest faces. It holds the world record for a single mass shooting, which the Yanks can't seem to beat no matter how often they try.
South Australia is the province of half-decent Reds, a festival of foreigners and bizarre axe murders. South Australia is the state of innovation. Where else can you so effectively reuse country bank vaults and barrels as in Snowtown? Just out of Adelaide, also named after a queen. They had the Grand Prix but lost it when the views of Adelaide sent the Formula One drivers to sleep at the wheel.
Western Australia is too far from anywhere to be relevant. Its main claim to fame is that it doesn't have daylight saving, because if it did, all the men would get erections on the bus on the way to work. WA was the last state to stop importing convicts, and many of them still work here in government and business.
The Northern Territory is the red heart of our land. Outback plains, sheep stations the size of Europe, kangaroos, jackaroos, emus, uluru and dusty kids with big smiles. It also has the highest beer consumption of anywhere on the planet, and its creek beds have the highest aluminium content of anywhere too. Although the territory is the centrepiece of our national culture, few of us live there, and the rest prefer to fly over it on our way to Bali.
And there's Queensland. While any mention of God seems silly in a document defining a nation of half-assed skeptics, it's worth noting that God probably made Queensland as it's beautiful one day, perfect the next. Why he filled it with dickheads remains a mystery. Oh yes, it was Canberra. The less said the better. Yes.
We, the citizens of Oz, are united by highways whose treacherous twists and turns kill more of us each year than murderers. We're united in our lust for international recognition. So desperate we praise, we leap in joy when a ragtag gaggle of corrupt IOC officials tells us Sydney is better than Beijing. We are a democracy so flawed that a political candidate who receives only 19 votes can win a seat in federal parliament. Not that we're whinging, we leave that to our pommy mates.
We want to make, no worries mate, our national phrase, she'll be right mate, our national attitude, and Waltzing Matilda, our national anthem. So what if it's about a sheep stealing Crim who commits suicide? We love sport so much our newsreaders can read the death toll from a sailing race and still tell us who's winning.
Yeah.
And we're the best in the world at all the sports that count, like cricket, netball, rugby league and union, AFL, roo shooting, two-up and horse racing. We also have the biggest rock, the tastiest pies and the worst dressed Olympians in the known universe.
A takeaway was a mathematical problem. A pizza was something to do with a leaning tower. Or potato chips were plain. The only choice we had was whether to put salt on it or not. Rice was only eaten as a rice pudding. Calamari was called squid, and we used it for fish bait.
Yeah, exactly.
A Big Mac was what we wore when it was raining. Brown bread was something only poor people ate. Oil was for lubricating. Fat was for cooking. Tea was made in a teapot using tea leaves and never green. Sugar enjoyed a good press in those days and was regarded as being white gold. Cubed sugar was regarded as posh. Fish didn't have fingers in those days. Eating raw fish was called poverty, not sushi. None of us had heard of yogurt. Healthy food was consisted of anything edible. People who didn't peel potatoes were regarded as lazy. Cooking outside was called camping. Seaweed was not a recognised food. Kebab was not even a word, never mind a food. Prunes were medicinal. Surprisingly, muesli was readily available. It was called cattle feed. Water came out of a tap. If someone had suggested bottling it and charging more than petrol for it, they would have become a laughingstock.
Future. A day when someone will be named as Australian of the Year, which has already happened, as you're probably aware. We've had a very varied collection of people to win this award, but of course, as in most awards, there are many who deserve to be recognised, but were not. I'd like to say, being a tennis enthusiast, how pleased I am to see two young tennis players, Alex Deminer and Ashley Barty, who embody what Australians used to stand for. Players who put in plenty of hard work in order to contest the game with an attitude to give of their best until the last ball is struck. They were able to conduct themselves in a mature way, win or lose, and to make all Australians proud. I'd also like to take this opportunity to tell you about another Australian I had not, and I suspect many of us had never heard of before. He attended school from the age of 7 and was a bright student. In 1885, at the age of 13, he left school and became a servant of C.B. Young, an influential landholder in Adelaide who encouraged his academic interests. He was a South Australian who was famous for his inventions. He took out provisional patents for 19 inventions. Here are some of the interesting facts about the life and achievements of the man they call the Australian Leonardo da Vinci. As an inventor, one of his goals was to achieve perpetual motion, a motion that continues indefinitely without external energy source, considered impossible. While conducting experiments to attain perpetual motion, he made a discovery which led to the improved mechanical hand tool for shearing sheep that converted curvilinear motion into a straight line movement. This forms the basis of modern mechanical shears. In 1909, he patented his shearing tool, but despite his modification being adopted widely and making enormous sums for the industry in Australia, his interests were not protected, and it was others who gained financially from his invention. The patent eventually lapsed and he made no money from it. He was also a recognised authority on ballistics. He made the basic design for a helicopter by 1914, 22 years before the first operational helicopter in 1936. He got the idea from how a boomerang moved through the air and applied that principle in his helicopter design. He wrote several articles for the Sydney Daily Telegraph, with the first being published in August 1924. He wrote numerous articles for several magazines and newspapers. He also published 3 short booklets. In 1920, a Sydney publishing house, Angus and Robertson, commissioned him to compile a book on legends. The resulting plagiarised book was credited to Scottish anthropologist William Ramsay Smith, with no mention of him. It was in 1998 that it was found the book was almost unaltered from his original manuscript, and that he was only paid £150 for his efforts. The book has now been republished in its original form under his name. Though he was a popular speaker, he was often denied accommodation and refreshment.
He was Aboriginal. In 1953, David Unipon was awarded a Coronation Medal. He died on the 7th of February 1967 at the age of 95. In 1985, he was posthumously awarded the Patricia Weikart Award for Writers. In 1988, the University of Queensland started the David Unipon Award, which is given annually to help writers to get their books published. In recognition of his contributions, David Unipon has been featured on the Australian $50 note since 1995.
So who are the Cape Horns? Here I've got to acknowledge before we start the work of an Yvonne Coate in her comprehensive book on the Cape Horns, Keith Murray's book, From Ore to Diesel on the Swan, and the University Press publication, There Were Three Ships. The name Cape Horn, that's why, excuse me, assistant to your mind.
Oh, here we go. All right.
Plagiarising some of John's tricks.
Here we go.
Who are the Cape Horns? The name Cape Horn was apparently derived from a maker of capes or caps. They were a Huguenot family kicked out of France following the repeal by Louis XIII in 1685 of the Edict of Nantes, which allowed Calvinists, otherwise known as the Reformed Church, political freedom. And the Huguenots, as you know, dispersed all around the planet. They took off to all sorts of places. Now, there's a fellow called Samuel Cape Horn. He popped up in Scotland.
Reid?
In 1794, and with his wife Anne, was found working for a Scottish peer on an estate in Perthshire, Scotland, when their first children were born. He was an educated man, and he then took up a position at the Thames Union Workhouse in Buckinghamshire, where he fed and doled out relief to the poor. And, on the 13th of April in 1842, following the death of two of their children from typhus, he decided he'd hand in his resignation on the 26th of April 1842. He and his family left on the 431-ton Simon Carver for the Swan River colony. It's cold on that Southern Ocean. Now, on board, there were 219 sponsored immigrants, and they also 18 Parkhurst boys. Now, this is something you possibly never heard about. These were used from the Isle of Wight prison. Bearing in mind this is 1842. Which poses the question, were these youths actually our first state's first convict immigrants, or were our first child immigrants? Sam was to supervise these youths and also fill the role of educator aboard. For these services, he was paid the princely sum of £4. Now, on the 20th of August that same year, in 1842, he changed his hat.
That was looking good on you, Ron.
And, oh, here we go, right on the ball.
Right.
Guess where he arrived? He arrived at Fremantle. And after some time as a storekeeper in Perth, Sam took a lease on the 36-acre Swan River location 88 at Point Walter.
Point Walter.
Right. Now, a house and inn had previously been built there in 1831 by an Alfred Whalen and run by a W.H. Smythe that was burned down the year after it was built in an Aboriginal fire. Now, being a shrewd man, Sam realised the importance of river transport on the new colony, and he established a halfway river house. He obtained a liquor licence and called the place the Waterman's Retreat. It soon became better known, though, as the Cape Horn Inn, where a weary boatman could get a drink or two, and some of its timbers are still occasionally visible on the beach there today. To enhance his trade and make an extra penny, and cut 2 miles off of the trip between Perth to Fremantle, he and his boys maintained a channel. That's the shop. Across the spit. And of course, everyone had to come through that channel and they were very thirsty when they came through, so he did fair business. To enhance his trade, there you go, and he and his boys maintained that spit, and they charged for its use. Now the Capines had about 9 surviving children, and Sam ensured that all his sons became various classes of boatmen, and his daughters married shipwrights, naval architects and ship's captains, because everything was done on the river. There was no roads in Perth or Rail at that time. Now all the sons and sons-in-law operated lighters and barges. They distributed goods to settlers along the Swan and Canning. They ran mail from Perth to Fremantle daily in 2-man rowing gigs. They had to contract with the government to do that. And some plied, they also took passengers. Some plied the coastal trade in ships, and another introduced England to Jarrah, known then of course as Swan River mahogany.
Yeah, it's the date on which Dorothy McKellar died. She was 84. Dorothy was a Sydney girl. She came of a very well-to-do family. They lived in inner Sydney, of course, in the 1880s. And the ladies will be interested to know that she was wealthy enough, the family enabled her to travel. They went to London, of course, England, as colonialists did in those days. Colonialists, in 1880. There she met, just before the First World War, a fellow, a man who was also a bit of a poet, not famous, but poetically inclined. They fell in love. They wanted to get married. He proposed. She, in the time, had to return to Australia to ask her family's permission. Be that as it may, she did that, and war broke out. She wrote to him, saying, yes, the family allow me to accept your kind offer of marriage, and heard nothing. At the end of the war, First World War, she travelled back to England to find the man had married. He had not received her letter. So she never married, but I want to present her poem that we all know, A Sunburnt Country. It was firstly called Sunburnt Country. She called it My Country. The first, it's prefaced by, obviously, she's talking to people in England. The love of field and coppice, of green and shaded lanes, of ordered woods and gardens is running in your veins. Strong love of grey-blue distance, brown streams and soft dim skies, I know, but cannot share it. My love is otherwise. I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, for droughts and flooding rains. I love her far horizons. I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror, the wide brown land for me. The stark white ring-barked forests, all tragic to the moon, the sapphire misted mountains, the hot gold hush of noon. Green tangle of the brushes, where live lianas toil, and orchids deck the treetops, and ferns the warm, dark soil. Core of my heart, my country, her pitiless blue sky. When sick at heart around us we see the cattle die, but then the grey clouds gather and we can bless again the drumming of an army, the steady soaking rain. Core of my heart, my country, land of the rainbow gold, for fire and flood and famine she pays us back threefold. Over the thirsty paddocks, watch after many days the filmy veil of greenness that thickens as we gaze.